right. Welcome everyone to our Fireside Chats for Future Ready Instructional Leadership. I'm your host, Dr. Donna, and I'm thrilled to have you here to meet another visionary educator, Dr. Louise Debreczeny. This show is about more than just conversations. It's about collaboration, innovation, and reimagining what leadership in education can look like as we prepare for a world that doesn't yet exist. In each episode, I will introduce you to more thought leaders, principals, superintendents, edupreneurs, and more to engage in authentic dialogue about the challenges we are facing, the opportunities we have ahead, and the bold ideas that will be shaping the future of learning. So think of this as your fireside, a space where sparks of inspiration ignite, ideas flow freely, and connections grow stronger. Together, we'll explore ways to ensure that every student thrives in an ever-changing world. So grab your coffee, get comfortable, and join us as we dive into another powerful episode of Fireside Chats. Let's reimagine leadership, tackle the uncharted future, and leave a legacy of innovation and equity in education. So, Dr. Louise, welcome. How are you today?
I'm good. It's so good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you for accepting that invitation.
Of course, of course. It's always good to
So,
talk about education and the future of education. It's
yes, and you and
exciting
I
topic.
have spent a lot of time nerding out on education and how people learn, haven't we?
Yes, we have. Yes, we have.
In fact, we have a long-standing weekly meeting where we discuss exactly that. And so maybe one of these days you'll see a book come out from both of us. Hopefully.
The nerdy education book.
So, Dr. Louise, tell us a little bit about your organization and what it is that you do.
Well, my business is called the Institute for Neurosemantic and Sociocognitive Learning, LLC, INSL LLC for short. And what we do is we serve children and adults with learning differences with one-to-one services on Zoom. So that's really nice. I'm able to work with kids in Canada and all across the United States. And when I first started on Zoom back in the COVID era during the pandemic, I was really kind of hesitant about whether Zoom would be a good way to work with students with learning differences. And I have found for the most part, it's perfectly doable and really successful. So yeah, we've been helping kids all over and adults all over the country.
Yeah, so this idea did not come out of nowhere. There obviously was some need that you saw. Can you talk a little bit about the needs that you were seeing from our learners in schools or wherever it may be, and why you came up with this solution for those learners?
Well, the idea of having a private clinic is not an original idea. And before I opened up INSL, I worked for Dr. Ellen Arwood's clinic, the Apricot Clinic in Tigard, Oregon. And then she retired. So my business is a follow-on business. So what the need is that there are students who are in our schools whose needs are not being met and who need additional instruction in order to try to catch up or even to be reasonable people. So for example, our students with autism, that school does not handle them well because they are visual motor learners and they're not given the visual motor strategies at school that they need. So at INSL, that's what we do, is use the visual motor strategies to help people with autism, ADHD, specific learning disabilities. And of course, the strategies are applied differently for each person because what we do is we evaluate your learning strengths and then help you develop strategies surrounding those strengths. That's, I think, one of the big differences between INSL and other organizations. Often what's targeted is the deficits in a student's life. So we make detailed reports about what's wrong with this person. And that person becomes more and more of an object and feels worse and worse about themselves. And also, families, if a family calls me up and wants my help, They already know there's something wrong with their child. They want to know what's right with their child and how they can capitalize on that. And that's what we look at INSL. What are your learning strengths? And what kinds of strategies can we use that play to your personal strengths? And I think that's why we're successful helping folks.
Yeah, that's incredible. So you talked a little bit about the visual motor component that you really hone in on. For those of us who, might be less familiar with what that really means, can you talk a little bit more about what does that mean? What does that look like for a child when you're focused on that?
A visual motor learner is someone who needs to move their hand to create mental images. And I would be happy to draw out a little
Oh,
lesson
look at
for you
you.
guys with my document camera and show you
You
what
are
I'm
more high
talking
tech than me.
about. All right, let's see if I can share. Oh, will you enable sharing?
Yeah, I sure can. As soon as I remember how to do it.
There's a green
There
share
you go.
tab.
I got
The up
it.
arrow.
I
Found it?
got it. There you go. Should be
Okay.
able to share now.
So, I'm going to
Looks like it's
zoomed
going.
in way far. I'm going to zoom it out a little bit. So, can you see my document camera okay?
I can. Yeah.
So, when we're talking about visual motor learners, what we're actually talking about is how incoming data is processed for these people. So, when someone is learning, let's draw a learner. And our learner is sitting in the classroom with her pencil. Give her. And she is looking at the teacher. And the teacher, in this case, is just giving information about this animal that we call a cat. So the teacher draws a cat and writes cat and then says cat. And so this person, the learner, only has so many ways they can take in information. We can smell. Well, we don't really want to smell the teacher. We can taste. And I've had plenty of special ed students who do things like lick the teacher and lick the desk, but that's not the best way to learn either. We have other senses. We have our eyes, so we can see ideas that the teacher draws. We have ears, so we can hear ideas that the teacher says. And for the typically developing student, they're good to go. They make a mental picture. Oh, yeah, that's a cat. And they make a picture connecting the two ideas together. So this is your typically developing visual learner. Now, there's another way to input meaning, and that is through the movement of your hand. So in our brain, I shouldn't have covered up her brain with hair. In our brain, if we draw a circle, for example, it actually physically creates a circle in the visual cortex. And so the visual system is very, very spatially related. And so it's also connected to the hand because we have this hand-eye coordination. So the hand is connected to the motor cortex, and the eye is connected to the visual cortex, and then the two are connected together within the brain. So the hand and the eye work together and have to work together. And some students, the way they input meaning is by actually moving their hands. So this is the movement piece of for the visual motor learner. Another movement piece is the fact that people's lips move when they talk, and the teacher's marker moves as he writes. So the visual motor learner is going to want to watch the teacher's mouth. and watch the teacher's hand with the marker here, and also use his or her own hand to draw and write the ideas. So this person needs to draw and write the ideas in order to make a mental concept. So that's a visual motor learner.
Hmm. And so it sounds like what you're saying is that most students don't necessarily have to have the motor part of drawing the cat, but some learners have to have it. Is that right?
Right. So I kind of see learners, I see, so for the visual motor learner, I kind of see two categories. I see the typical learner who, if given the drawing and writing strategies,
Mm-hmm.
develops properly. And then I see the SPED learners, and these are your kids with autism, Down syndrome, ADHD, specific learning disabilities. These kids, not only are they visual motor learners, but they also have the addition of these other disabilities. Whereas your typical visual motor learner, if given the drawing and writing visual strategies, will never end up here. But a lot of times these kids end up here because they didn't get what they needed. So by third grade, they're not learning, they haven't learned to read or write because they're visual motor learners, and they haven't been given the opportunity to draw and write, because the way we work is we draw. So let's see, we draw. Here's a tree, and I'm leaning against the tree. So Lou is leaning against the tree. And then we write the sentence, Lou is leaning against the tree. So we draw, we write, and then we read it back. So now I've got my paper, and I'm going to read back what I just wrote. So that's the processing of draw, write, read. And that's how we do it at INSL, because for our visual motor learners, they need to draw the ideas and write the ideas to get that movement input, and then they can read it back. And here's the thing. At school, first we learn to read, which is decoding, and it's fraught with all kinds of distress for visual motor learners because they can't decode by sounding it out. It just doesn't work for them. And so they fall behind. So those are the kids that I feel like, those are the kids that I have a really strong love for, because when they come to me at INSL, I can take them in 1 or 2 years, get them completely up to grade level where they don't need me ever again. And so those kids are really fun to work with. But then I also love working with my students with autism and Down syndrome and other disabilities. They're longer term students, because if you have autism, that's not something I can change for you. What I can do is work within your learning system so that you can learn how to be a pro-social person. So we draw, write, read, because if you can write it, then you can read it.
Yeah. And I noticed your drawings, you don't have to be a Picasso or a formally trained artist to be able to draw simple images for kids. Is that right?
Yes. And it's so funny. Grown-ups are so scared to draw, Dr. Donna. They're just so scared to draw. And that's one of the things, like when I go and do a professional development for special ed teachers or other teachers, they love the idea, but they're scared to death to draw. And so we have to somehow get over that. But
Yeah. Yeah, we sometimes get very self-conscious of ourselves with no need, because if the kids can understand what you're drawing, they're going to make meaning, correct?
yes, and if they need something in your drawing, like for example, I forgot to put hair on the teacher in the drawing that I just made for our viewers. And that might have bothered some of you and it might not have bothered others of you. Now, if a child notices that there's no hair and there ought to be hair, they'll tell me, you forgot the hair. And so I add the hair. And if it's not important to them, they won't say anything. But yeah, it's really funny if I forget one of the arms, the kids will say, oh, Dr. Lou, you forgot the arm, and I'll draw it in. So yeah, if they don't understand it or if they need something more, they always tell me.
Yeah, that's really an interesting idea that, you're allowing students to be able to advocate for themselves through this process as well.
Yes. Yes. And there's lots of different ways. So the visual thinking strategies that I use with students, let's just take autism, because half of my students are people with autism. And the other half are a mixture of everything else. And so I love working with the students with autism because when you start drawing and writing with them, they start understanding the world around them, and their behavior changes. And their behavior changes because their thinking comes up and they can think about how they look in relationship to other people. So there's a variety of things that I do. One is I work with the family to find out what sorts of issues you're having at home. Let's say you've got a 6-year-old with autism who is refusing to go to bed at night. Well, often when I sit down with the parent and child together, what we do is we make a cartoon story of the bedtime process. So we say, okay, well, what time does bedtime start? And how long? So we work through that whole process together. One of the things I've discovered is that more than half the time, the family doesn't have a set routine. And without a set routine, a person with autism feels terribly unsafe because they don't know what's going to happen. And it's a safety issue. When I don't know where I am or what's going on or what I'm supposed to do next, then I'm constantly anxious because of that. So when we work through this whole bedtime routine cartoon, it's an opportunity for the parent and child to work together to collaborate on the process, because there's choices like, do I put on my pajamas before or after I brush my teeth? And those are kind of minor choices, but you give the child those choices. And then when they know what to do, the bedtime routine smooths right out. And you can hang the cartoon up, let's say in your bathroom or where you change into your pajamas, you hang up the cartoon so that if you don't remember the exact routine, you just go to it and see what needs to be done.
Yes.
Go ahead. You had a
Yeah,
question.
no, it sounds like you work not just with, the students, but you can work with families, and I imagine working with teachers as well.
Oh,
So
yes.
so there's lots of ways that you can work with people to help support students. How do people get in touch with you to be able to work with you?
Well, you can call me on my phone, 360-910-6752, or you can email me at louise@instituteNSL.com, or you could go to my website and click on the go to the contact page and send me a message that way. Or you
Yeah.
can find me on Facebook or LinkedIn. So,
Great. So I think, if educators are tuned in and they're listening to this, I would encourage them to share this information with families who might be needing some support, to share it with your administration, to share it with teachers. What are some things that teachers can do in their classroom to help provide supports for students who really need that visual connection?
well, the first thing I always suggest to teachers is to make comic strips of their procedures.
Mhm.
The kids with visual motor learning systems don't hear oral directions very well, because if they understand the oral direction, then they can process it and use it. But if they don't understand it, it's just like, and one of the things that we forget about English is that it's a low context, time-based language. And
Right.
our thinkers are high context, visual thinkers in school these days. Like 95% of students are visual thinkers. And so when you say something like, okay, class, get ready for lunch, that seems perfectly obvious to us as adults. But what does that actually mean? It means that you have to put away what you're currently doing in a place where you can access it again later when it's next time to use that thing. Then you have to do whatever processes happen in the classroom for actually physically getting to the cafeteria. And different teachers have different ways of doing this. Some teachers want to line up inside the classroom and then everybody walks to the lunchroom. So other teachers have a different system. So for our children with the visual motor learning systems, they're just like confused by oral directions, and particularly by oral directions that don't give all the details. So instead of get ready for lunch, it's put your math book in your desk and go to your cubby and get your lunch if you brought your home lunch from home, or line up at the door if you didn't. And then you're going to have additional, there's going to be some kids that's not quite enough. So what happens is if you draw out your procedure, and most of the kids get it, but there are one or two who don't, then you have to look at what did they do, because that's where they're missing information. One of the things we do to our special ed kids is we talk real slow and we take all the words out. So it's sit, walk. And the kids are like, I am not a dog. And furthermore, why am I sitting and why am I walking? And when I sit, what am I supposed to do while I am there? And when I walk, where am I supposed to go? So you have to be really, really, you have to change your language. Dr. Arwood calls this oral cartooning. It's when you make your language visual. So you actually talk through the steps that you want the person to do instead of using that low context phrase that we would normally use. Now, once all the students know how to get ready for lunch, then you can say, get ready for lunch. But until they all know what to do, you have to say, put your book in the blah, 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 right? And give that string of activities so that they can see themselves doing it and know what to do.
Oh, absolutely. So, we've talked a lot about students with autism, special ed students, these students with different abilities, but it seems also to me that using strategies like this, and the reason I'm bringing this up is whenever I suggest something to some teachers, the response that I get back was, if I have to do this for one, I have to do that for all. Can you address that a little bit? In two ways. One is, how do using strategies like this benefit all students? And also around that equity piece of, some students may need it and other students don't, and why it still is so important to use strategies like this for those that do need it.
We have a few students that are auditory learners, and auditory learners don't need you to draw for them. They can listen and see simultaneously and put it all together. We have very few of those learners anymore. And it's because of our changing culture. Our brains are formed by our environments, and we have very visual environments now. We don't sit around the fire telling stories in the same way we did for millennia. Now we have television and visual things. So we have all these people who are visual learners. So your kid with the auditory learning system, it enhances their learning to see the drawing. It's not required for them, but it enhances their learning. So you have 5% of your students where drawing will be an enhancement, and the whole rest of your class needs it. So not just the child with autism can't do without it. The rest of the kids do a whole lot better with it. If you draw for the children, they'll know what to do right away versus trying to, what did she mean? So yeah. So did that answer your question?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we get caught in this cycle of having to meet the needs of all students, but then we sometimes think that if I do one thing for one student, then I should be doing it for all of them. And in some instances that is true, right? You really should be equal, but in other instances, I need a pair of glasses, but I am not going to give every single kid in my class the same pair of glasses because they don't all need them, right?
Right,
This is something
right,
where you have some kids who need it, most kids will benefit from it, and some don't need it at all. And that's okay. You're still not, it's not wasted time. And it's those kids who don't need it at all, you probably would be doing something different for them that you might not be doing for the others. And that's just the way it is. So I think we have to get over ourselves sometimes.
right. And you know what? It's okay to give a person who need with special needs special treatment. I, you know, I don't understand why we all have to have the same thing. I mean, just because I had an orange for lunch doesn't mean you have to have an orange for lunch.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying? That's really not a good analogy. But if I have 2 or 3 children with significant disabilities in my class out of 30, 25, or 30 kids, if I draw for the entire class knows what to do and can help those 3 children who need the help when if the drawing isn't sufficient. So, for example, beginning of the school year, you're setting up all your procedures, and it's a time consuming activity to teach the children all the procedures. But if you don't, your whole year stinks. So, you teach the procedures, and maybe 90% of the class gets the procedure on the first time you cartoon it out. And they're like, oh, yeah, we got that. And then you hang the cartoon on the wall in the classroom so anyone who needs to can consult it. And, most of your kids are ready to go. Well, that's when you look and see if those 2 or 3 kids didn't get it, then those are the 2 or 3 kids you can have a little special drawing session to the side with them and spend about 10 or 15 minutes clearing up any of their questions. And then, if you have a kid who is so significantly impacted that they need a paraeducator, then that's what you have your paraeducator doing, is drawing and writing for that child what that child is supposed to be doing. See, when you draw a cartoon, you can observe what the children learned by what they do afterwards. And so after you see it one time, then you can see which piece of information you needed to include more information about. But
Right.
it's always about giving more information. And
Hmm.
that's something that we traditionally don't do in special ed. In special ed, we take away all the information, and then we wonder why we're 10 years behind by the time you get to 12th grade. Nobody's made any progress.
Yeah, and I think also the idea of hanging it on the wall so kids can reference it, creating those anchor charts. Anchor charts, we're always told we should be creating anchor charts and have them around the room. Sometimes we can have anchor charts all over the place and it becomes too much. So, how does a teacher determine which visual anchor charts are necessary and which ones they might be able to replace with something else? Is there a way that they can assess that and know that, or
Oh,
know which
sure,
types of anchor
sure.
charts to put up?
Let's say you drew an anchor chart about how you're supposed to turn in your math paper. And every single kid is turning in their math paper in the correct place, and no one's having any problem with that. You can take that anchor chart down. They all know what to do.
Yeah, yeah. So
And
it's
that's
just
how, that's how I judge it, is does everybody know what to do? And if so, the anchor chart can go away.
yeah, perfect. Perfect.
The
Well,
other thing that people try to do is make the cartoon ahead of time and hang it up for the kids. Nope, that does not work.
interesting. Talk a little bit more about that.
When you draw and write the chart in or the cartoon in real time and engage the students in the process as you go through, when they go back to that cartoon later, it's very easy for them to understand it. But if you just draw and write a big complicated cartoon for yourself and then you just hang it up with no explanation, it takes a lot more thinking power to figure that out. And it looks really busy. And that's one of the things that's just one thing that teachers need to be aware of. let your principal know ahead of time that you're making, drawing and writing these charts and that you're doing them in real time and that you're posting them in the room. Because when your principal comes in to evaluate you and sees that messy looking cartoon that they don't understand because they weren't there when you drew and wrote it for the kids, then you have to be able to explain to them why it has meaning to the kids when it
Right.
doesn't have meaning to them.
Right. So, I'm picturing myself drawing out one of these cartoons. And so I'd be talking through it. So that metacognitive process that I'm going through is coming out. So they're becoming aware of what the metacognition piece is. They're hearing the words. So you've got the auditory piece, you've got the visual piece. And if they're drawing as well, then they have the motor piece. And it's sounds like, in neuroscience, all those three components really operate together.
Yes,
And
they do.
that helps formulate the memory. Is that accurate?
Yes, yes. Well, learning is interesting because as we all know, we can go into a class or something and we can understand what the person is telling us, but maybe we don't remember it later. And
Mhm.
so there's kind of like two parts to that. One is, first of all, you have to understand the material, and then you have to take a break and come back and do the material again in a different context. And you have to repeat with little breaks several times in order to actually remember it permanently. So, and also the other piece is that if I give you the exact same content over and over with a little break in between, that's not effective. Let's say we're talking about the human body. So the first lesson is in context of uh, the things that the human body can do. And then we come back later. Now we're talking about the context of the things that the human body needs to be healthy. And so, and we're revisiting the same anatomical concepts over and over, but we're putting them into slightly different contexts. And that's what builds those long-term memories is learning the materials more than one time. You have to visit it several times, and that it can't be rotely done the exact same way each time. It has to be a different activity each time.
Yeah. So they're building that depth of understanding of what the concept is. Um, Talk a little bit about age groups that these strategies work with.
Ah, well, I know people who use these strategies with infants, and the baby holds the pen and in their fist, and then you do hand over hand. And I know a woman who had twins who were born very prematurely, and she was told that they would not ever be normal kids.
Mhm.
And they worked with those two kids every day, hand over hand. And now they're thriving 10-year-olds with that don't look different from the other kids. So you can start like really, really early with the visual motor strategies.
Mhm.
Then that you can the strategies can be adapted to whatever cognitive level you're at. So if you're talking to 3 to 7 year olds who are in the pre-operational thinking level, then you're going to have them drawing and writing all about themselves in relation to the thing that you want them to learn. When you get into the 8 to 11 year olds, now when we're at the concrete thinking level, we can start drawing and writing about how other people interact with these ideas. It's not just about ourselves. Now we can talk about other people. And then when we get up into the teen years, when we're supposed to be formal thinkers, that's when we can start addressing some of the bigger ideas like liberty and justice and government. And through all of that, there are drawing techniques it's basically drawing stick figure ideas all the way up through. I worked for my dissertation. I drew out the visual system as I read articles about it for myself so that I could understand what I was reading because neuroscience was not my field at all. I had no idea. And it was just extremely interesting. And also, I literally my brain was on fire. There was so much new, but I had to draw it out, and that's at the doctoral level. So what I'm saying is that the drawing strategies can be used throughout your life to help you with learning.
Yeah. So for the audience members listening here, again, I think contacting Dr. Louise to be working with any age, whether you have young children who are just learning to read and write and just entering school, or whether you have a child or an adult who you find, oh, maybe we missed something along the way and this could be it. Dr. Louise would be a great person to have a conversation with about that and really to be able to help devise a plan where she could support you in or your child in that. If you are a school leader or a teacher, bringing Louise into your school and doing some professional development or even some coaching around how do I work with these students, special educators alike. Um, I think this is an area where we don't, and I've been in a lot of schools. I've been in a lot of classrooms, hundreds and hundreds of classrooms, and you know, many, can't even count the number of schools, probably hundreds of schools. Um, Drawing is not something we see on a regular basis in our schools.
No,
And
it's actually forbidden.
yeah,
The kid that
yeah,
grabs their pencil and starts doodling gets in trouble for it. But that's the kid that needs to doodle in order to be able to stay focused on class.
right. And I think I shared with you, Dr. Louise, the episode on the Sunday morning show that was about the art of doodling. So if you have not seen the CBS show, it was just a little commentary on the art of doodling or whatever it was called. It was something about that. Doodling is there's a real connection to the brain. Some of the most brilliant people in the world have pages and pages of doodles, and they can tell you years later exactly what meeting they were in and what was discussed based on the doodle they have on their page. Um,
Right?
and whether there is any connection from the doodle to what that information is. But it's a really interesting piece of research to really look into and stopping our kids from
Right?
doodling
Right?
when it really could be a strategy that helps them.
That kid that can't stay in his or her seat, you give them a paper and pencil, and this is the instruction. Right. Draw pictures of what you hear me say.
Mm,
Right? Watch my mouth to see what I say and draw pictures of the ideas that I'm saying. And
yeah,
that will keep them focused and in their seat because they're moving. They're
yeah,
moving their hand. And
yeah,
that's one of the surefire ways to know a person is going to be visual motor learner is if they're up out of their seat moving all the time when they're supposed to be sitting down and working. That's like a really nice red flag that says, we need to be giving this person a pencil and a piece of paper so they can draw their ideas.
yeah. All right. One more time. How can people get a hold of you?
At instituteNSL.com. Come on over to my website. I've got a contact page. You can also go to LinkedIn. I'm Dr. Louise Debreczeny, and I'm also on Facebook. Both INSL and me personally are both on Facebook and LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank you so much for being on our very first Fireside Chat and for taking the time to nerd out with us on
Love nerding out with you,
education
Dr. Donna.
again. Um, so we've come to the end of this first chat, and I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us in this conversation, and most importantly, for your unwavering commitment to leading in a way that prepares our students for a world beyond what we can even imagine today. Thank you to our incredible guest, Dr. Louise, for sharing her insights, challenges, and strategies to navigate this uncharted future that we have in instructional leadership. Your perspectives and collaboration remind us that the path forward is built together through a shared vision and purposeful action. So if today's discussion sparked any idea, any questions or strategy that you're excited to try, we both encourage you to take it back to your teams, to your schools, to your communities. This is where real transformation begins. So be sure to join us next time when we talk to whoever our next visionary educational leader is. And don't forget to connect with us on social media to continue the conversation. Together, we're shaping the future of education, one fireside chat at a time. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, stay inspired, stay connected, and keep leading boldly into our uncharted future.